It's early morning, June 18th, 1982. Fog hangs over the river as a passerby notices a man's body hanging from scaffolding beneath Blackfriars Bridge. This isn't a crime scene, it's real. The victim is Roberto Calvi, known as God's banker for his financial ties to the Vatican. In his pockets, police find 5 bricks and $14,000 in different currencies. Almost as if someone wanted to leave a message. Blackfriars, literally, the Black Brothers, the name isn't a coincidence. Calvi belonged to a secret Masonic lodge, Propaganda Do. Its members called themselves the Black Brothers. Many believe the execution site was chosen on purpose. A dark sense of humor from those behind it. Just before his death, Calvi lost his position as head of Banco Ambrosiano. And a day earlier, his secretary, Graziella Corocer, fell to her death from a window at the bank's Milan headquarters. Coincidence? The investigations dragged on for years. At first, it was ruled a suicide, but his family and independent experts proved Calvi couldn't have climbed the scaffolding himself. There were no traces of paint on his shoes. Later tests showed the injuries on his neck didn't match a typical hanging, and there were no fingerprints on the bricks in his pockets. In short, someone put him there. But who? The Italian Mafia, a secret Masonic lodge, or the people handling the Vatican's money? All of them show up in the speculation around Calvi's death. The trial, which ended in 2007, cleared 5 defendants, but the mystery remained. The most likely scenario, Calvi simply knew too much about the Vatican Bank, the Mafia, and political deals. And he shared the fate of those who break the silence. Just one episode, but a spectacular one. But this story is just getting started. Let's take a step back and see how the Vatican built its financial empire. Luxury apartments in the heart of Paris, 737 properties worth nearly 600 million euros. Townhouses in London, 27 buildings in elite districts worth over 100 million. 140 properties in Switzerland, Geneva, Lausanne, tens of millions more. And then there's home. In Rome alone, the Vatican owns around 3,000 properties. Entire buildings, offices, apartments. In 2019, renting out 2,400 apartments and 600 commercial units brought in nearly 100 million euros. Impressive? No surprise, it's the result of decades of steady accumulation. What's more interesting, the Holy See spent years hiding these investments. In 1929, the Vatican received massive compensation from Benito Mussolini's government for lost papal statesland, creating the independent Vatican state, the so-called Mussolini millions. That money was quietly invested in real estate and company shares around the world. A British shell company, British Grolier Investments, bought prime London properties on the Vatican's behalf, including a building on St. James Square and the Bulgari jewelry store on New Bond Street. Officially, the church's name appeared nowhere. Only lay Catholic bankers showed up as shareholders. In the end, the Vatican built a real commercial empire in secret, worth hundreds of millions of pounds, keeping those assets outside its territory and out of the public eye. Years later, the Vatican itself admitted those rainy day funds had grown past 500 million pounds, roughly $600 million today. With that money, the church quietly took stakes in companies and properties in some of the most expensive places on earth. When The Guardian exposed it in 2013, based on a Council of Europe report, Vatican officials said nothing. One Polish Vatican expert defended the church, saying capital should grow, and building financial reserves is normal. Maybe, but in that same year, 2011, while holding this hidden wealth, the Vatican reported a 19 million euro budget deficit. One of the pillars of this financial empire is the Vatican Bank, officially the Institute for the Works of Religion. It will come up again and again in the story, because it's the church's vault, a safe full of secrets. But before we look inside, we need to go further back, because none of this fortune would exist without the faith of believers, and the cynical trade built on it. Before Mussolini's millions and the banks, the church made money off salvation, indulgences, a subject that still embarrasses it today. There was a time when you could literally buy a shorter stay in purgatory, for yourself or for a loved one. You paid, and the church issued an official document that, in their view, opened the way to heaven. The year is 1517. Johann Tetzel, acting on behalf of the church, moves from town to town, and money pours in behind him. Because Pope Leo X urgently needs funds, huge ones, to finish St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Indulgences become one of the biggest money drives in the church's history. Everyone pays, the poor give their last coin, townspeople hand over entire chests of florins, all to secure a place in heaven. This cynical trade in the sacred couldn't go unchallenged. On October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg, condemning indulgences. He asks, if the Pope is richer than Croesus, why not build the basilica with his own money instead of coins from the faithful? Paraphrase of one of his theses, the Reformation begins. Luther calls Rome a den of thieves, condemning the buying of salvation. But even as the church is shaken, the financial machine works. The fortunes raised from indulgences help finish the Vatican. St. Peter's still towers over Rome as a symbol of faith, but its foundations were built on coins squeezed from fear and hope. Indulgences were the church's first major financial scandal, something like a medieval pyramid scheme. Renaissance popes like Alexander VI and Julius II were patrons of art, rulers of the Papal States, and businessmen all at once. They sold church offices, collected tithes and imposed taxes. But it was the indulgence trade that became the symbol of corruption, shaking the unity of Christianity. The Vatican had handled vast sums for centuries, but in the 19th century, in the age of modern finance, a new ally appeared: Jewish bankers, once scorned by the church as Christ killers. After Napoleon's fall and the wars, the Papal States were on the edge of bankruptcy. Despite theological prejudice, money had no religion. The Rothschilds, a Jewish banking family, agreed to lend the Pope a massive sum, and so in 1832 the Holy See received £400,000, an astronomical sum worth billions today. Witnesses were shocked when Baron Rothschild was excused from the ritual of kissing the Pope's foot, an honor once required of every guest, and it wasn't the only exception. In the decades that followed, the Rothschilds became the Vatican's official bankers. The irony is, the same popes who publicly condemned Jewish usury and spread anti-Semitic stereotypes relied on Jewish financiers behind the scenes. You could argue that without the Rothschilds, the Vatican might have gone bankrupt. The church didn't just borrow from Jewish bankers, it invested. By the 19th century, popes were putting money into bonds, railways, and industry. Of course, unofficially, through front companies, because the church doesn't run businesses. Then something happens that could have brought the whole system down. In 1870, after the unification of Italy, the Pope loses the Papal States. From that point on, for decades, he's effectively a prisoner of the Vatican. No territory, but money. And once again, the Rothschilds and other financial advisors step in. They're now in charge of managing the papal treasury. From the start, the Vatican knew secrecy and discretion were everything, and that would prove crucial in the 20th century, when the institution at the heart of our story was created, the Vatican Bank. In theory, a safe haven for church money. In practice, a haven for criminals. We'll get to that in a moment. Rome, 1942, World War II is raging, and Europe is burning. But behind the Vatican walls, Pope Pius XII makes a move that changed everything. He creates his own bank. He establishes the Institute for the Works of Religion, the Vatican Bank, completely outside the control of secular authorities. From the start, it's wrapped in secrecy. To open an account, you don't need to give any details. No taxes, no reporting. A perfect place to hide money, like a Swiss bank, only more closed. In the first years after the war, rumors spread that the bank helped move money for Nazis in hiding. The Allies had no access to Vatican vaults, so if a Nazi official managed to deposit gold with the divine banker, he could sleep easy. Popes also made heavy use of the bank, though officially none of them had accounts there. After all, the Pope is supposed to be a humble shepherd. In reality, the money multiplied behind closed doors. Right after the war, in 1946, a secret US Treasury report surfaces. Declassified only in the 90s, it casts the Vatican in a very different light. It claims Croatian fascists, the Ustashi, looted vast wealth from murdered Jews and Serbs during the war. When the war ended, the money was smuggled out of Yugoslavia, and what happened to it? The report claims around 200 million Swiss francs, about $170 million today, ended up in the Vatican for safekeeping. That Ustashi treasure became the basis for serious accusations, but it was just the beginning. The report also mentions something called the Vatican Pipeline. Funds were said to move through Rome to Spain and Argentina. helping finance the escape of Nazis. Gold taken from Holocaust victims, first hidden in the Vatican, then used to help war criminals escape to South America. The Vatican, of course, denied it all. It wasn't until 2020 that Pope Francis opened part of the archives from the time of Pius XII. But many questions remain unanswered. In all of this, it's hard to separate fact from legend, because the Vatican guards its secrets well. In the 1970s, as Italy sinks into corruption and the mafia moves into politics, the Vatican sits at the center of the web. Two new players appear, Michel Sindona and Roberto Calvi, tied to the mafia, Freemasonry, and the Vatican Bank. Sindona is a Sicilian banker and a trusted man of Pope Paul VI. The church entrusts him with millions to grow, but Michel also moves with the mafia, the CIA, and is close to Italy's prime minister. He played on many fronts at once, telling everyone what they wanted to hear. In 1974, his financial empire collapses. Banks go under and the Vatican loses a fortune. Sindona disappears with help from Cosa Nostra. He's eventually caught and sent to prison. In his cell, he suddenly collapses after drinking a cup of coffee. The autopsy shows cyanide. Just before he dies, he manages to shout, "They poisoned me." Who? We may never know. But the man who held the Vatican's money dies like a mafia informant, and that's when the man from the start of our story appears. Roberto Calvi, Sindona's protege, head of Banco Ambrosiano in Milan, the second largest bank in Italy, where the Vatican held major stakes. Calvi went further than his mentor. He set up a network of shell companies in tax havens, Panama, Luxembourg, the Bahamas, and moved hundreds of millions of dollars through them. The money just disappeared. In the background, the Vatican Bank issued letters of recommendation and guarantees, giving those companies credibility. Calvi funded Solidarity, right-wing parties across Europe, and was also suspected of laundering money for the mafia. In 1981, Italian prosecutors start closing in. It comes out that Calvi was a member of the P2 Masonic Lodge, the Black Brothers, the same group that had plans for a political coup in Italy. A year later, Banco Ambrosiano collapses. $1.3 billion disappears from the books, and Calvi flees, first to Vienna, then to London. And there, as you remember, his story ends, hanging from a rope, with bricks in his pockets. Who killed him? The mafia? The Vatican? Or both? Because those worlds overlapped. After Calvi's death, an international scandal erupts. The Vatican tries to distance itself from God's banker, but it's clear it was involved. In 1984, the Vatican Bank pays out $224 million as a gesture of goodwill. It never admitted guilt, but it paid, and no one was held accountable. Archbishop Marcinkus, who sat on the bank's board, took refuge behind Vatican walls and never faced trial. He later moved to the United States, where he lived out his life in peace, protected by Pope John Paul II. As an aside, his predecessor John Paul I reportedly had a plan to clean up the bank and remove Marcinkus. He died after just 33 days in office, officially of natural causes, but among his papers was a list of planned purges, and that's where the legends begin. Operating outside the control of Italian authorities, the Vatican Bank became the perfect middleman. As I mentioned, accounts were opened anonymously and transfers moved without revealing the sender. Politicians, mobsters, businessmen, they all could use it. In 2010, Italian prosecutors seized 23 million euros because the Vatican couldn't explain where the money came from. A scandal breaks out. Dozens of suspicious accounts come to light. In 2013, Pope Francis orders an audit. As many as 4,800 questionable accounts are shut down. But mafia-style operations aren't just about money, they're about silence and protecting your own, even after crimes are committed. And that same logic, for years, shaped how the church handled sexual abuse scandals. For decades, priests accused of abuse were moved from parish to parish. Instead of justice, secret settlements, payments for silence. In the US, Ireland, Germany, and here in Poland, the same pattern played out. Lawsuits piled up, and dioceses went bankrupt. In the US alone, the church paid out billions of dollars. In Los Angeles alone, over $1.5 billion for nearly 2,000 victims. In Ireland, compensation came from a joint state church fund. And here in Poland, lawsuits worth hundreds of millions are widely discussed. The church pays for the sin of its people, not just with money, but with the loss of trust. There were even cases of buying silence, like Father Martial Maciel, who abused seminarians and paid high-ranking officials in the Vatican for protection. It wasn't until Pope Benedict XVI that he was removed. John Paul II had ignored it for years. Why? It's a difficult question, but the uncomfortable facts remain. Pope Francis was supposed to be the Pope of change, and in many ways, he was. He lived simply, rejected luxury, and went after the finances. The Vatican Bank finally started publishing reports. Thousands of suspicious accounts were closed and new controls were put in place, but his reforms quickly hit a wall. Then the Becciu scandal breaks. A cardinal, one of the Pope's closest aides, is tied to a questionable investment. The Vatican spends $200 million on a luxury building in London, and the deal turns into a disaster. Its value drops, and the church loses over $100 million. Worse, the deal used money donated by the faithful, funds meant to help those in need. This isn't just a financial scandal, it's a betrayal of everything Francis stood for. Becciu loses his cardinal title, and in 2023, he's sentenced to 5 years in prison for embezzlement. It's the first time the Vatican convicts a cardinal like a common criminal. But the questions remain. How many cases like this never came to light? Francis didn't live to see the end of his fight. He died at 88, leaving one question behind. Was this real change or just an image? And will his successor return to the old ways? There's talk that artificial intelligence could analyze diocesan spending, flagging cases where, for example, a bishop suddenly buys a luxury car with parish funds. Of course, there are no miracles. If people want to cheat the system, they'll find a way. But the fact the Vatican is even considering tools like this suggests times may be changing. And technology is also a threat to Vatican secrecy. Photos of documents taken on a phone, recorded conversations, and the damage is done. The Church felt this firsthand in the Vatileaks scandal in 2012. Pope Benedict XVI's personal butler, Paolo, stole secret letters from the papal desk and handed them to the press. It sparked a sensation, exposing financial intrigue and power struggles inside the Vatican. From Archbishop Vigano's letters, it emerged that renovations on a Vatican villa involved corruption, costs inflated by millions, and some officials simply siphoning money from the budget. Then, in 2015, it happens again. Two journalists publish books based on leaks from another financial commission set up by Francis. The documents reveal that only 20% of donations meant for the poor actually reached them. The rest went to luxury. Cardinals lived in apartments around 3,000 square feet, like princes. One of them spent 200,000 euros on renovations, paid for by a children's hospital foundation. This time, the Vatican arrested and charged those suspected of leaking the information. In the end, the journalists weren't convicted, press freedom prevailed, but Vatican whistleblowers saw what could happen to them. In 2017, the Vatican's first Auditor General, Libero Milon, resigns. He later says he was forced out after uncovering misconduct at the very top. He claims he was accused of spying just to push him aside. Milone warns the world that even Pope Francis didn't have full control. On one hand, there's modernization and transparency. On the other, the old system of cover-ups still operates. The Vatican has to face the 21st century, digital finance, cybersecurity, media pressure, and people who now have access to information like never before. Secret archives are no longer enough. In Ireland, reports and journalists forced the church to admit its failures. Here in Poland, films by the Sekielski brothers pushed bishops to act, the same in finance. When the media exposed the London scandal, Francis stepped in and punished Cardinal Becciu. If it hadn't leaked, nothing likely would have happened. The Vatican is the heart of the Catholic Church, a sacred place for 1 billion believers. But murders, mafia deals, money laundering, ties to dictators, and codes of silence, these aren't conspiracy theories. They are documented facts. For decades, events there have resembled organized crime. That doesn't mean there's no good. The Vatican is also a place of prayer, help, and hope. But the shocking truth may be this. For years, an informal mafia operated there. People in cassocks and suits, putting power and money above the gospel. They formed factions, fought for influence, protected their own, and removed those who tried to fix the church. The truth will set you free. In the context of Vatican scandals, those words take on a very different meaning. Let's hope the day comes when the public learns the full truth about this institution. Imagine a company whose logo is more recognizable than the Christian cross, yet it's been accused of falsifying research, manipulation, even murder. Click the thumbnail on your screen and uncover the disturbing secrets hidden by Coca-Cola. This is called Lemon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a moment.